I read for 8 hours a day for 30 days. My brain started living in two places at once. On day 19, I reached for my phone to text my sister and typed a sentence I did not write. The words were correct. The meaning was what I intended. But the syntax, the specific structure of the sentence, the rhythm of it, the way one clause folded into the next, was not mine. It was a character's. A fictional woman from a novel I had finished 4 days earlier. Her voice had colonized mine so completely that I had used it automatically without noticing in a real conversation with a real person. I sat looking at the sent message for a long time. Then I opened my journal and wrote, "Something is happening to the boundary between here and there. This is that story." The theory. The average person reads for approximately 17 minutes per day. 17 minutes! In a life presumably structured around acquiring knowledge, understanding, experience, 17 minutes per day of the one activity that neuroscience agrees provides all three simultaneously. The research on what sustained reading does to the brain is some of the most consistently extraordinary in cognitive science. Increased gray matter in regions associated with language, empathy, and complex reasoning. Measurable changes in perspective-taking ability. A documented phenomenon called narrative transportation, the degree to which the reading mind enters and inhabits the world of the text that produces physiological responses indistinguishable from real experience. Not metaphorically indistinguishable. Physiologically. The heart rate responds. The stress hormones respond. The emotional processing centers of the brain respond exactly as they would to lived events. 8 hours a day is not reading, it is immersion. I wanted to find out what immersion does to the boundary between the world you are reading and the world you inhabit. The setup, 30 days, 8 hours of reading per day. No genre restriction. I had a stack of 40 books covering fiction, history, philosophy, biography. The only rule, no rereading. Every book must be new. Every world must be entered fresh. No audiobooks. The auditory processing of heard language is a different cognitive experience from visual reading. I was not studying the effect of stories. I was studying the effect of the specific act of reading. The eye moving across the line, the voice in the head that is neither spoken nor silent, the peculiar private experience of language received rather than heard. I began on a Monday. I want to tell you about the first 3 days because they almost ended the experiment. Week 1, the resistance. 8 hours of reading sounds like a holiday. It is not a holiday. By the end of day 1, my concentration had fractured. Not because the books were bad, they weren't. Because the sustained attention required to read at depth for 8 consecutive hours is a muscle, and like any muscle subjected to sudden extreme use after a period of moderate activity, it had screamed and then refused. I read with genuine absorption for approximately 4 of the 8 hours on day 1. The other 4, my eyes moved across the lines, and my brain somewhere downstream declined to process. I was reading in the way you can drive a familiar route and arrive with no memory of the journey, physically performing the act while mentally somewhere else entirely. By day 3, the concentration muscle had not recovered. It had adapted. This was the first thing the experiment taught me. Reading at depth for 8 hours a day is not the same experience on day 3 as on day 1. The brain, given no choice, begins to reorganize around the new demand. The attention that had fractured by hour 4 on day 1 was holding through hour 6 by day 3. Not comfortably, but holding. By day 7, it was holding through hour 8. The resistance was over. Something else was beginning. The crossing. Days 10 through 20. Around day 10, the quality of the reading changed. The change was not dramatic. It arrived the way all significant changes in the brain seem to arrive, not as an event, but as a noticing. I was reading a novel set in 19th century Russia, and I became aware, somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, that I was not reading about the house in the novel. I was in the house, not metaphorically. In the specific way that the phrase is usually metaphorical but had become, in that moment, something closer to literal, not a hallucination. I want to be precise. I knew I was sitting in my apartment. I could feel the chair. I was not confused about reality in any clinical sense. But the house in the novel was present in a way that my apartment was not quite present. It had weight. It had texture. It had the specific quality of somewhere I had been rather than somewhere I was reading about. And when I set the book down at the end of the session, when I returned fully to the apartment, There was a quality of crossing back that I had not experienced before, as if returning from somewhere rather than simply closing a book. I noted this in my journal. I wrote, "The boundary is becoming permeable. Day 14. I started a biography of a person who died in 1923. By day 17, I knew this person with an intimacy I do not have with most people I have met in real life. Not because the biography was particularly revelatory, because 8 hours a day of immersion in a consciousness produces a specific quality of knowing that ordinary social contact does not produce. I knew how this person thought. I knew the shape of their anxieties. I knew the specific quality of their intelligence, their humor, the way their mind moved across a problem. I caught myself, on day 17, forming an opinion I wanted to share with them. The person had been dead for 100 years. I noted this without alarm. The brain does not experience the immersive knowing of a consciousness as fundamentally different from the immersive knowing of a living person. The categories, fictional, historical, living, are taxonomic. The felt experience of knowing is the same regardless of which category the known person occupies. Day 19. The sentence I typed in my sister's voice. This was the moment I understood what was happening. The brain, immersed in language for 8 hours a day, in the specific rhythms and structures and voices of 40 different writers in 30 days, had stopped treating those voices as external input. They had been processed at the same depth as native thought. They had entered the mind and made themselves at home. I was not losing my voice. I was gaining a house with more rooms than I had known it contained. Days 20 through 30, 2 places at once. The final 10 days were the strangest. By day 20, the permeability was constant. I did not have to be reading for the other world to be present. Walking to the kitchen, I would pass through the geography of whatever book I was in the middle of, not hallucinatorily, not confusingly, but as a second layer of spatial experience running underneath the first. The apartment was the apartment. The 19th century house was also somehow present, both simultaneously, neither displacing the other. My dreams in the final 10 days were the most complex I have ever had. Not frightening, complex. Full of people who did not exist, in places that were not real, and events that had the emotional weight of significant lived experience. My sleeping brain had been given 40 new worlds to process, and was processing them with the same seriousness it applied to my actual life. I woke on day 27 from a dream so complete, so emotionally resonant, so specific in its geography and its characters and its stakes that I lay in the dark for 20 minutes afterward, simply being present in the aftermath of it. The way you lie still after something that actually happened. Then I reached for the journal and wrote for 40 minutes. Day 30. I finished the final book, a novel I'd been reading for 3 days, slow on purpose, reluctant to let the 30 days end. I closed it and sat with it for a while. The apartment was the apartment. The world of the novel was still present at the edges of the room, both simultaneously, neither fully dominant. I understood what the experiment had produced. Not a blurring of reality, the opposite, a deepening of it, a second layer of experience running constantly beneath ordinary life, richer, stranger, more populated than ordinary life alone. The brain does not treat story as entertainment. It treats story as experience. 8 hours a day for 30 days had given it 30 books of experience to integrate. And it had integrated all of them, quietly, into the texture of daily consciousness. The 17 minutes that the average person reads per day is not nothing, but it is not enough to cross the threshold. 8 hours is the threshold. Once you have crossed it, you cannot fully uncross it. The house has more rooms now. I live in all of them.